Hello, everybody. Okay, this video was pending from last week, and it's just because I was reading Robert Cialdini's book on influence. And if any of you have read it or watched my videos on this book, he's basically he's talking about a lot of different ways in which we can influence the psychology of people. But one thing that he's making a lot of emphasis on right now is the fact that people would rather look consistent but wrong than inconsistent but right. And what I mean by that is that they're more willing to change. They're more unwilling to change something that they have already said, and that's part of the consistency principle, where they need others and they need to view themselves as consistent, right? And another key factor there that I just mentioned is by others. So that's the principle of social proof. So this is a combination of two ideas, which is the consistency principle, right? Like being consistent, and more so when other people know, or you think other people can know, that you're being consistent or inconsistent, right? Now, Robert gives a couple of examples, such as like people are more unwilling to change their points of view, even when they're presented with new information or information that contradicts what they have just said. More so when they write down their ideas than when they just think of them, right? Like he talks about some experiments that they do. So people are more unwilling to change when they think that others will be able to perceive them as being incorrect, right? Well, to make a long story short, it's very interesting because he says here this sort of stubbornness can occur even in situations where accuracy should be more important than consistency, right? In one study, when 6 or 12 person experimental juries were deciding a closed case, hung juries were significantly more frequent if the jurors had expressed their opinions with a visible show of hands rather than by secret ballot. Once jurors had stated their initial views publicly, they were reluctant to allow themselves to change publicly either. Should you ever find yourself as the foreperson of a jury under these conditions, then you can reduce the risk of a hung jury by choosing a secret rather than public balloting technique. Okay, now what really caught my attention in this part that I read was hung juries, right? And this is what we're going to be talking about in this video. So, what is a hung jury? A hung jury basically is when we all know, like in the United States, the court system is kind of set up where you have the people that are defending, you have the people that are being prosecuted, right? They're lawyers. You have the judge, but then you have the jury. And the jury is supposed to be made up of 12 common everyday citizens, right? That they are called in for jury duty, right? So when they're doing their jury duty, in this case, in the court cases, the judge gives the sentence, right? The judge will take care of the sentencing. Like, I sentence you to life in prison, or to 2 years of probation, or to a year of house arrest, whatever. But the jury is the one that needs to deliberate, right? Think, discuss amongst themselves after they hear the whole court case, right? All of the arguments for, against, whatever, all of the evidence is shown. And the jury needs to come to a conclusion, right? They need to come to a verdict. And the verdict can either be guilty or not guilty, right? Now, what needs to happen here, and I find this to be very interesting, and I think it's the correct way to approach life in terms of organization, politics, basically anything. Because if you know me, I've been having a problem with democracy, or this idea of the majority rule, for some time now, right? Where we could see it in our everyday interactions, right? Like, let's say you're with a group of friends, like I once said, and you're deciding whether to have pizza or hamburger. So then they say, let's have a vote. And of the 7 people, 5 decide hamburgers and 2 decide pizza. So then now we're going to have hamburgers, even though that may be a bad option because the hamburgers in that area of town suck, and the peaks is actually better, right? So it's like majority doesn't always mean better, right? In this case, efficiency doesn't mean consistency, right? So this happens. Hung verdicts are a thing because, or hung juries are a thing. Yeah, I think I said hung verdicts, but hung juries, they happen when there's lack of something called unanimity. So unanimity, which is being unanimous, and let's not confuse that with anonymous. Anonymous is lack of name. It comes from which is lack of, like atheist, like theo, believer in God, religiously, not a believer, religious in God. In this case, it comes from anonymous, right? Anonymous, like nomenclature or name or noun. So there's a lack of person, right? That's anonymous, like Alcoholics Anonymous, whatever. This is different. This is unanimous. And unanimous comes from unity, right? Where namus is like the animation, right? Like the spirit, and it's one spirit, one unity. Kind of like the idea of one world, right? And this gets taken into decision making at a sociological or a social level, right? Now, hung verdicts are a thing because there is no unanimity, right? Unanimity. I'm not pronouncing that correct, but there's no unity basically in the decision making, which in this case means out of the 6 or 12 people that need to decide the verdict, guilty or not guilty, um, there's people that are either not sure or that are against it, right? And this can basically, and I checked, this can happen because it's basically like a tie, right? If it's like, let's say it's a 12-person jury and there's 6 that say guilty and there's 6 that say not guilty, that's a hung jury. If there are 8 that say guilty and there are 4 that say not guilty, that's a hung jury. If there are, I would even say 11 that say guilty and 1 that says not guilty, that's a hung jury. Now, of course, there are exceptions. I think in the United States there are cases more on the terms of civil, not criminal cases, but civil cases, and also in certain states where all you need majority again. So you could have 10 people say this and 2 people say another thing, and as long as you have 10 people, that's good enough. But most people, and especially federal cases, operate on a unanimous decision, right? Which means everybody needs to agree to that, right? Which I find that to be excellent. And this is actually the solution to the majority rule democracy system that we have. Now, can you say that's ideal? Yeah, of course you can say that's ideal. And that is ideal, right? Ideal doesn't necessarily mean fairy tale or non existent. It just means it's very difficult to achieve, but if achieved, would be the best, right? So it's very difficult, especially if we talk about like country wise, right? Or even state wise or city wise. How are you going to get everybody to agree to something, right? And we can probably see some situations where this takes place. Now, it needs a lot of negotiation. It needs a lot of listening, understanding. It involves like Chris Voss's method, right, on negotiation, like finding black swans, checking out the gray area, not so much, black or white. It's either my way or the highway, but like actually coming to terms on different ideas, different situations, how we can resolve or solve certain issues. And I did a little bit of digging, and I came across a term called consensus democracy. Now, consensus democracy means that maybe it's not everybody, it's not unanimous, but it's close to, right? And this kind of goes against majority democracy, where we know majority democracy is basically like over the 50% line. So if it's like 51 to 49, right? 51% of the votes to 49% of the votes, they win, right? The 51%. Or even like 50.1% versus 49.99%, the 51 point or the 50.1 wins, right? So that's problematic, right? So what we're really trying to achieve is a unanimous or a consensus, a real consensus among, if not all, most, but really most, right? Like I'm talking 90 or higher percent of the people. We see this with the Quakers. The Quakers are a religious society of friends, um, where they say everybody needs to agree, everybody. And at least if you don't agree, you don't oppose it, right? You don't oppose the decision, right? And that's good enough. If you don't oppose it, if you're not against it, you're just kind of neutral. That's good enough, right? And the law passes or the rule passes or whatever, or we make that decision. It's also seen in indigenous cultures and in Switzerland. Switzerland has this notion of power sharing among multiple parties, right? Which I think is what could ultimately make Switzerland very neutral, because we see that it is neutral in relation to Europe and the stand that other European countries have made throughout history, like especially during the world wars, where Switzerland remained neutral, right, and was able to maintain that neutrality because the countries around it saw that it benefited them, right, to have like their money there or whatever. Even Hitler, I think, was like, yeah, we're not touching Switzerland. Um, so I found that to be pretty interesting. Another example could be like a family agreeing to sell a house, right? Like, let's say the patriarch dies, right? And then you have all these sons and daughters that need to sell the house, or they don't need to, but they're gonna sell the house because they want to receive their equal parts of the house or whatever. Um, and every one of them has to be on board to sell it. Like if one person doesn't agree, then it doesn't get done, right? And that's the power of real individual voting autonomy, right? I think an initiative, right? If one person is able to change the course of that decision, that's true individual power, which is like power to the individual, right? Because what happens in a democracy, right? Let's say out of 10 people, 9 say yes and 1 says no. Well, too bad for that one person. They need to deal with it, right? And more so, what if they're right, right? What if they were right? And just because we have this stupid notion, which I think in probably, I don't know how many hundreds of years into the future, we're probably going to view this democracy idea as a stupid idea, right? As a it's lazy. It's lazy ultimately because it's just like, oh, who's more, who's bigger, who's, you know, and it may even come from the idea of like, let's not think about it too much. Like let's just say, who can beat up who, right? If there are 20 of us and 15 are saying, yeah, let's do it, and 5 are saying no, well, you 5 deal with it, put up with it because you have to put up with it because us 15 can kick your butts, right? And that's kind of the idea. It's a lazy idea. Instead of genuinely negotiating, and now do we have that capacity? No, we need to develop it, because you can't just, it would be time consuming nowadays to say, okay, let's sit down and think about which is the better option. If it's pizza or hamburgers, I know that's time consuming and we're not really good at that yet, right? But we need to get good at it. We need to become more sophisticated in expressing our emotions and trying to view as much as we can rapidly, so that even decisions as little or as meaningless as like, what's the group having for dinner tonight, can be done in a very efficient way, right? I think that would be optimal, right? But again, that means that we need to develop, or that means we have to develop our mental capacities even further and our social abilities, right? Which I don't think we're really doing as far as like technology, but well, that's a different topic. So I just wanted to mention this. It's kind of like a critique, this video, or it's a criticism on democracy and the majority rule notion of social organization. But what I'm really trying to get to is the idea of unanimity and how having a unanimous system is ultimately the best type of system, right? Where everybody agrees to do something, everybody, not even a single person is out, or like the Quakers, where at least, if some people aren't with it, they're at least not opposed to it. They're just kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, you can do it. We don't really care, right? Doesn't really affect me that much or whatever. So yeah, let me know what you think. Should we have unanimity or majority rule? Let me know what you think, and I'll see you in the next video. All right, peace.